Hey everyone, today we're going to talk about two topics that are really important to your opportunity process. So we've already talked about how to choose a program, we've talked about standardized exams and English. Today we're going to talk a little bit about letters of recommendation and required documents for your process. So first of all, what is a good recommendation letter? Well, a good letter should talk about how long the writer has known you and in what capacity. So I have known Oscar for 6 years. I was his professor in 3 different classes and his mentor for his thesis. Or I was Jennifer's boss during her internship and we worked together for a year and a half. Or however the person knows you and for how long. It should be written in an academic manner. So that basically means it should not be colloquial. It should not have informal language. It should be a formal document written by someone who is writing for other professors or other professionals. It should use concrete examples. And this is a big one, and this is also something that is really different from a Colombian context. So instead of just saying maybe, Louis has done great research when I've been working with him. They should use examples such as, Louis has done great research in X, Y, and Z about X topic when we worked together during a semester on his paper that he published. It should be concrete examples, and these examples furthermore should relate to how you can succeed in a U.S. study program. Remember that this is a letter with a specific motive. The motive is to get you admission into an institution and to get you funding. So the examples that the professor gives should go to that end. So any examples from academia or ways that you as a student can be successful, for example, being flexible, being a strategic thinker, being proactive. These are things that are really valued in a classroom, specifically at the graduate level. So if professors can use examples that kind of lead to that, all the better. And a good letter should also not talk too much about who you are, your personal background, let's say. Your family life or growing up, but it should focus on you as a professional and as an academic, and who you are and your character as that academic person. So who should you target to write these letters of recommendation? Who should you ask? Well, we generally say, and remember that these are general guidelines that apply in most cases, but there are always exceptions. So it should generally be someone who knows you well in an academic context. This is not necessarily like the dean or the rector of your institution or the head of the department if you haven't had any classes with them. This is someone who you know on a personal level, who you have had contact with, who you have been either in classes with or worked together on your thesis, for example. It doesn't matter as much the elevated title of the person. And this should be someone who is not a family member or primarily a friend. And we put that caveat of primarily because we know that many of you have friendship style relationships with your professors, and that's wonderful. That's your colleagues. You're both researching the similar topics, and a relationship that might have started as a professor and a student does develop into colleagues, especially with students as talented and driven as you guys are. But this should be a relationship that maybe started as a professor-student, and then if you're now colleagues, that's okay. But it shouldn't be someone who is in your family or who is related to you. So it's preferred that the person who writes your letter, the people who write your letters, have a graduate degree in the field that you want to study. Now, why is this preferred? Well, the main reason is because someone who has already done either a master's or a doctorate degree, they can say with confidence, I have gone through this and I know that Andrew is prepared to do this process. I know that Harold has what it takes to complete this study to do the graduate degree. If you don't have professors or bosses or supervisors who have done this, it's not the end of the world. It's preferred. At least one of your recommenders does have the degree that you're aspiring to have in the U.S. But again, this is a general requirement that doesn't necessarily have to apply to everyone. And again, just to repeat something that we've kind of said all along, someone who has worked closely with you as a professor or a supervisor. So this could be conducting research, this could be an internship, this could be a thesis, etc. Some of you may say, okay, well, shoot, I only have bosses. I only have supervisors from a work context. And we recommend to have at least one person from the academic context. But if you have bosses from a work context, well, what can you do? Well, one tactic is like we talked about earlier, to try to use examples that can also translate to an academic context. So have your boss emphasize maybe your strategic planning, your problem-solving skills, your flexibility, things that really could be benefits and strengths once you're in an academic context. So, okay, we've talked about what a good letter should look like, who should write it for you, and now how do you actually ask those people? Well, first of all, you need to start recultivating these relationships now. It might have been a while, months, even years, since you have talked to some of these people. And so it's important to rekindle this friendship relationship and start the conversation. So first, always thank them for their time. I know that's a given, but be very gracious and thankful for their meeting with you and then agreeing to writing the letters. Explain the context. Feel free, if you want, to share this presentation with them or explain it to them that letters of recommendation in the U.S. are a bit different than in Colombia. It's not simply saying that Laura was my student from this time to this time. It should talk in depth about who you are as a student and examples of what you have done, examples that go beyond what you have on your CV or what you have on your transcript. Really examples that can showcase and give added value to your application. Think of these letters as one component of the application, and what can these recommenders bring to the table that might not be revealed in the other parts of your application. You might have to remind them what courses you took with them, the time you worked with them, etc. It might have been a long time and they might have many, many students, and so it never hurts to say, I was your student in Biology 101 or whatever. Then you can explain to them, maybe remind them some of the experiences or achievements that you have had that they might have been present for, and which experiences you would like them to highlight. It's always a good idea to give them copies of the transcript and the CV, including any honors or awards that you have, and also if you have already written your admissions essays, please share those with them too. Anything that can give them a window into what you are doing in the U.S. or what you are trying to do. It's also really important to provide details about how the format works. Is it online? Do they have to send the letter? Do they have to come up with a login? How many letters will they need to write? Do they have to write a different one for each institution? Or can it pretty much be the same letter with maybe changing the name of the institution? What will the letters look like? And then the due dates. Recommended, have them in a week before the due date. So this is something that's kind of out of your control as a student. So, say the due date is this date. I prefer, if it's possible, to have them in by December 1st or November 15th or whatever the date might be. So it's really important to sit down and have this conversation with them, orient them, advise them, but do not write the letter yourself. You may have professors who will come and say, hey, I'm happy to support. Give me the letter and I will sign it. And we really highly recommend against that. Universities really can tell when the student writes the letter. So if that situation comes up, you can say that, where you as a student are not allowed to write the letter, but you can provide documents, you can provide bullet points. You can provide a list of bullet points of these experiences or achievements, the context that you want the recommender to emphasize. And if they insist and say, oh, I don't have time, I'll sign whatever letter you write, it really may be best to find a different recommender, as hard as that is. So if a professor is insistent about writing their own letter, please let the Education USA advisor know, and then we can help you to navigate the situation. We understand it can be politically tricky, and we don't want to put you in an uncomfortable situation with professors who you respect and who you need to cultivate that relationship with. So again, remember to just bring the advisor in on any conversations that you might need. This is a little hard to see, it's a bit small, but this is a sample of a poor letter of recommendation. And the first time you read it, the first time I read it, it thinks, well, that's an okay letter. It talks about positive things, it includes how I know the person, etc. But the reason it is a poor letter is because it doesn't have any details. It's a very general letter, and it only tells of things that this advisor, this professor could have seen from the transcript. So, the problem here is that if it's just so general and so basic, it's not going to add anything to the application. And so that's, I think, the emphasis here. It's not a letter that says negative things about the student. It says positive things, but it doesn't add any extra value. And that's really what we're looking for with these letters. Again, the idea is that this is a part of the application. This is a window into who you are as a student and as a professional that we can't get from other parts of the application. And I think that's an important piece to transmit to your recommenders, to tell them, this is not kind of a formality. This is something that universities really look for to understand the student as a whole person. And I think that's probably, something you should tell your recommenders, but it might be the main difference in a recommendation letter in Colombia and a recommendation letter in the US. Here's some helpful resources for you, both about what a letter is and how you can get a good letter, how you can show your recommenders what this is, transmit to them the information. Because again, we understand that this is something that is a bit out of your control. It's not something that you're writing, but that's why it is important to be proactive and to use all the resources that you can in order to have a letter that will help your application, as opposed to being a neutral component of your application. So what are your next steps? Number one, you should check the requirements for each university. Most universities will require 3 letters, some require 2, but it's very rare to have more than 3 letters required. So, you should really start thinking of at least 3 people who could write these letters for you. And again, probably try to have at least one person from academia, former professor or former academic mentor. If you have all 3 from academia, that's fine too. But try to have people that will give a bit of different perspectives on who you are. Nowadays, most of the letters are submitted online through an online platform. So this means that you will have to possibly sign in with your professors. Generally, the system will generate an automatic email, so they will sign in. The system will email them the recommendation form, and then they will submit their letter electronically. Now, translations. This is a big question because some of you may be saying, well, I have a great professor who, worked with me for years, but she doesn't speak English. What do I do? And that's a really great question. And I think that the message that we want to give is the most important part is the content. If a professor doesn't speak English or doesn't speak English fluently, let's say hasn't, studied academic work in an English-speaking country or hasn't really been immersed in English for a long period of time, the best option may be for this person to write the letter in Spanish, and then we do a translation. How we do that translation is basically however you and your recommender are most comfortable. You can provide them with different options. One option is to send it off for official translation. So through the advisor, you get the hard copy of the letter, the advisor sends it to a translator that the Colombo works with, and then you send the translated version in English back to the recommender, who then uploads that version online. The Opportunity Fund will pay for that translation. It's no problem. We don't want anyone to be at a disadvantage because their recommenders don't have high English competency. That's one option. Another option is for you as a student to translate it. And this can get a little bit gray area because some recommenders prefer that the students not see the letters. So you can present these options to the recommender and see what they prefer, see what they're most comfortable with. But remember that the Education USA advisor can always act as a mediator, always act as a middleman. And so that's why you really should explain to your recommender what Opportunity Fund is, what Education USA is, what services they are offering. And so the recommender may be more comfortable sending the letter to the Education USA advisor and having the advisor facilitate the translation, whether official translation or other types of translations. The universities don't require for this an official translation because they're never going to have the Spanish version. They don't need to see the original Spanish version. But really the recommendation we have for you guys is if the person who will write your recommendation does not have really near fluent English, it's much better that they write it in Spanish and we get some sort of translation. Why? Because a letter that is written when the person doesn't have the broad vocabulary to be able to pick the exact word, the letter comes out general. Instead of saying, this is, an extremely avid, proactive student who has worked so hard to meet their research and academic goals, you get something much more general that says something like this is a good student who does research. And that's something that happens in all languages. And so work with your advisors and engage the English level of your recommenders and see what would be the best option. Next step is to make a list of 3 or 4 possible recommenders. It's always good to have a backup option, but we know that sometimes it's not. Sometimes you may have 2 or 3 people who are really good. So brainstorm this and then talk it over with your advisor to see what they think. And finally, you'll need to contact your recommenders as soon as possible, and this should be at least 4 weeks before the application deadline. But the sooner the better. If you can contact them this week and set up a meeting, that's probably the best option as soon as you can, so that they can start thinking about it. And also, if something happens where you need to find a backup option, or the person's going to be traveling, or whatever circumstance may happen, you'll have time to come up with a plan B or plan C or plan D, as the case may be. All right, so that's all we have with letters of recommendation, but we want to talk very briefly about required documents. So pretty much the only documents for graduate study that you will be required to submit, apart from financial documents, which will come at a later date, are your transcripts and your undergraduate diploma. Now, if you're still studying undergraduate, it's not a problem. You can submit your diploma up until the start of the university. But if you already have your diploma, then you can submit it, or a final transcript that says that you graduated. So a transcript is basically like a registro de notas. It's a list of all the classes you have taken and the grades that you got in each class. So what you will need to do is basically ask for that from the university, from your registrar's office. It needs to be an official transcript, which means that it's not, a copy from online that you can download and print out, but rather something that they give you in paper, and you will need to get that then translated. So your Education USA advisor will facilitate that translation process. It does need to, in many cases, be officially translated, so you may need to work with them to find an official translator in your city. This can be done electronically too. For example, I know some of our cohort is working remotely from Buenaventura, from Cartagena, and so you many times you'll be able to send it electronically and have the translator translate and then send a scanned copy of the translation. Some programs, and every year it's really less, will require a validation. And this means that your transcripts are sent to an independent organization in the US. There are several of them. Like Credential Evaluation Services is kind of the term for these types of organizations. And what they do is they go through the courses and the university, and they say, okay, these are valid courses at this university. This person completed all the courses that Universidad X requires for graduation in this major. Again, there may be institutions who ask you to do that, but at the graduate level, it's really less and less. So if that happens, if you see, you need your transcripts validated and your credentials validated, then that's what that means. But you can just show that to your advisor, and then they'll help you through the process of doing that. Sometimes also, because you're students with Education USA, sometimes the advisor can kind of serve that role. So you can always contact the university if that is the case and say, or the Education USA advisor can also contact and say, we're working with the student. I verify that this university is legitimate or accredited or whatever the case may be. So you should start with your transcripts, start soliciting those as soon as possible. I know some of you already have, which is great. But if you haven't, you should figure out the processes within your undergraduate institution. Because you're applying for graduate programs, you don't need to have your your high school transcripts. You only need transcripts from undergraduate and any previous graduate work that you have done. So thank you guys so much for your attention today. This has been a quicker webinar, but very important to start on these processes for letters of recommendation and required documents. Remember, we're really looking with the letters for something that can add value to your application beyond simply certifying that, fulano studied during this time with me, but something that speaks to who you are as a student and what unique characteristics that you have, and why they should kind of choose you as a future graduate student in their program. So thank you so much, and we look forward to seeing you next time. As always, let us know if you have any questions at all. Have a great day.